I'm Steve Perelman. I am the son of Betty Perelman and my father, Robert Perelman.
Right?
This is Betty Lou Ackerman Perelman. Okay. you start.
All right. I come from Fargo, North Dakota, where some people don't believe Jews exist, but they do. When I left Fargo to come to Omaha, at that time there were probably 100 Jewish families. So, and we had, at that time, 2 synagogues.
What year was that?
I am going to go back and to start a little further back.
Okay.
Originally, there was one synagogue, an Orthodox one. When I was born, the rabbi was Alex Katz, who then located to Omaha. At that time, he also had a wife and 2 sons. Unfortunately, his first wife died. I think when they came over from Europe, she was not too well at the time, so she couldn't take the North Dakota winters very well. Eventually, he married Belle, who came from Minneapolis, and had a daughter named Ozzie, and maybe many of you know her. Let's see, let's go back.
When were you born?
I was born December 9th, 1927. I'm the middle child of 3 children. 2 boys and me in the middle. Had a great growing up time in Fargo. It was so easy. There was no anti-Semitism that you could ever detect. I recall one time in school, I'd been out for the high holidays, and when I came back, the boy that sat in back of me said, "Were you sick, Betty? Is that why you were gone?" I said, "No, our Jewish holidays." "Oh, okay." That was it. I think that's the only thing that was ever said to me that could in any way even lead to anti-Semitism.
He was just curious.
And that's right. That's all he was curious. It was an easy way of growing up. The town would be just like a small town. We were about 35,000 at the most before I left. But as a child, you've heard this story many times with other people. Mother would let it have breakfast and said, "Just be sure and be home by dinner time." And I could go and play with my friends, walk up and see my grandparents on the other side of town. Whatever I wanted to do, as long as I came back eventually.
And her father was a policeman, so if she didn't come home at supper time, he'd find her.
But when he did come home on his motorcycle, all the kids in the neighborhood just keep running and coming on over because they thought that motorcycle was a tremendous thing.
I would guess that I'm the only person who grew up in Omaha who had a grandfather who was a policeman. I've never heard of anybody else.
Not only that, my grandfather, his great-grandfather then, was also a policeman. Anyway, eventually he did get out of the law business. Both of them did. He retired. And he became owner of a liquor store. Now that's not too unusual up there, but the occupation that most of the Jews were in up there was in the grocery business. Not too unusual either. It was not a manufacturing town. It was just the largest town in North Dakota.
It was a railroad town.
Yeah.
It was a transfer.
Yeah, we had 2 railroads going through there, the Northern Pacific and the Great Northern. That's right. Their tracks went right through town, and when a train came through, they stopped the train right at the intersections of the main street. So the cars were lined up blocks and blocks waiting for the train to leave. Because there were no other way around because they blocked all the main streets. That was the only frustration. And then when I was older and learning to drive, It was a small town, and you did not go more than 20 miles an hour, or else you'd be picked up. Believe me.
Tell them how you learned how to drive on the hill.
No, not. Oh yeah. Fargo is very flat. It has one hill, and it's a block long. So anybody that learned to drive there, and they all did, would have to, in the wintertime, learn how to go up and down that hill because that was the only place we had to train.
And where was the hill?
Right in the middle
What-
of town.
What was at that hill?
Well, you're talking about the synagogue?
Yeah.
It was at the bottom of the hill and about a half a block away.
So everybody who learned to drive went to synagogue first.
We had a big park there, and in the summertime we had a swimming pool there. But in the wintertime, that's when it was fun. They had a toboggan slide. Everybody had sleds and toboggans, and you'd climb up these stairs. They were probably more than about 3 flights up would be the equivalent. And you drag your toboggan on the side, put it up there, and then you crowd as many kids as you could on it, and down we went and into the park, and it was great. And you think that one ride was enough? No, we came back and did 2 and 3 and 4 in an afternoon. It was great.
Did you have any Jewish friends?
Oh yeah, there, surprisingly, in my particular age group, there were no other girls. I was the only one of that age. There were several boys. The girls were either younger or older than I had. That one was flat was mine. Rabbi Katz decided one time that the girls should learn Hebrew or learn Jewishness, and decided to start a bat mitzvah class, a cheder class. Well, he didn't know what he was getting into. Poor guy. He was used to these kids that came in and misbehaved, and he'd take his ruler and slap them on the head or on the hands.
Some things never changed.
But when he had started teaching the girls were all gossipy and had talking to each other, and he couldn't settle them down. So after the first class, that was it. He couldn't handle all these girls anymore. So I never learned anything, and it wasn't until I was grown, my kids were grown and everything, that I went through training at Bethel and had my bat mitzvah. Let's see, what else about Fargo? Okay, well, I couldn't get to Fargo without having parents and grandparents and whatever. And by the way, before I forget it, I was a very, very fortunate young woman because I was able to grow up to adulthood having both sets of grandparents. Something very, very rare. Anyway, one set of grandparents, both came from Romania. They married over in Romania, and my grandfather came over ahead of my grandmother to earn some money and be able to send it back, the normal routine for all of them. When he earned enough, my grandmother came over with my mother, who was only a year old. And then they came to Fargo.
Actually, no.
No?
No.
I'll learn something too.
Grandpa came to the United States from Romania, was in New York, and the industrial removal group got him a job in Buffalo, New York. So he went to Buffalo, New York, and when Grandma and great-grandma came to this country, they landed in New York, got on a train, went right up to Buffalo.
But
And
eventually then they came to Fargo.
But then eventually they came to Fargo. But yeah, they never lived in New York. They were in Buffalo and then Fargo.
Yeah. Okay, so that was that one set of grandparents.
These were the Eusters.
Yes. This is my mother.
Solomon and
And-
Eva Euster.
And they eventually had 7 girls, my mother included in that.
And
There was a son, but he died in, like he was 19 or 20, somewhere in there. No?
1932, he was in his very early 30s.
Really? I always thought he was younger.
Nope.
So that was one family. My other grandparents, a little more unusual. My grandpa Ackerman, that's my dad's father.
Jake Ackerman.
Came from Russia. I'm gonna let Stephen embellish on that. But anyway, when he came here, eventually he became a salesman going out on the road.
With a horse and buggy, no car.
Yeah, no car. And you've heard all the stories of the salesman staying at the farmer's house. That was my grandfather, because my grandmother, the woman that became my grandmother, lived on a farm. And when Grandpa had to stop at night for eat and sleep, he stayed at their house occasionally. And that's how they met. And an interesting story, I think, is that before they got married, evidently Grandpa told Grandma what it was in a Jewish household as far as keeping kosher. It was important to him at that time. And so before they got married, Grandma, her name was Mary, came into Fargo and went to work as a domestic with one of the Orthodox Jewish families so she could learn what it was to keep a Jewish home. So,
And she converted.
yes, she did. She did convert.
She was Norwegian Lutheran.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that important part. So they had two children, my father being the youngest, and I have an Aunt Sadie, or had an Aunt Sadie. My father, as he became a teenager, World War II broke out. And he wanted to get in all the excitement. And my grandmother, being the staunch Norwegian, said, no. Well, he went off and enlisted, and he was probably only about 15 at the time. So Grandma wrote a letter to his commanding officer explaining that he was the only son in the family. He was really too young to be there. She wanted him to come home and get his education. And would he please let her son cut out of the service? And she got the job done.
May I jump in here?
Absolutely.
What happened was he went and enlisted. He threatened his parents that he would go to Canada if they didn't allow him to enlist. So he forced their hand and they gave their permission. So even as an underage person, he enlisted in the war effort. He eventually was sent to France. He was in the Navy. And when peace was declared, that's when my great-grandmother, wrote the letter to get her son Sidney home early so that he could get on with his life, which was a good thing because he got married to my grandmother. But he then also, after he was mustered out of the Navy, he signed up to be in the National Guard of the Army. So, thanks a lot, Grandma.
So, let's see, where was I? So that, and my aunt from that side, she married married a Jewish man, and they lived in a very small town called Valley City, North Dakota, about 50 miles away from Fargo. And in that town, believe it or not, there were probably about 3 Jewish families, and it was a very small town. So we Jews get around all over. I had 2 brothers, as I mentioned, an older one, Alvin, a younger one, Robert, Bobby. He rarely uses the name Robert, it's always Bobby. And he's 80-some years old, still Bobby. And we all grew up in the Fargo school system, which was an excellent system. I was always amazed when I talked to other people that had been other places after high school graduation to realize how well prepared we'd been at this high school. Because in the high school part of it, we actually had to have a major and a minor like you do in college. And this was to expose us to what we would be going into, the type of atmosphere. Many kind of classes were available.
What did you major in?
You think I can remember it this late? I really don't remember what the major and minor were.
What did you do after you graduated high school?
Then I went to a secretarial college in Chicago, which is what I liked doing.
Which was very beneficial to me because she was able to type my papers in high school. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
How did you meet Dad?
That is quite a story. During the war, Bob was stationed in Fargo after he did his preliminary training in an officer's training unit at one of the universities in Fargo. And the Jewish community thought that they ought to establish a little USO for all the Jewish soldiers and sailors, because there was another unit in some other school that was a naval training.
So you had a lot of foreign Jews in town.
Yes, and a lot of them came from out east. In fact, I remember one telling me, and he came from like the New York area, he really, really expected when he came to North Dakota that there would be Indians greeting them, and he was kind of disappointed they didn't have any when they got off the train. That's how naive they are. Anyway, so the Fargo community decided to establish a little USO. The problem is they didn't have too many girls that were available to dancing with the soldiers and this and that. So I was not 16 yet, but they allowed me to come on over and dance and be companions and everything. We were watched like a hawk, though.
You were a dancing girl.
Yeah, I enjoyed it, yes. And that is where I met Bob. He was with my friends that were older than I, my girlfriends. And we were invited over to one of their homes. And then I saw him at a football game sitting over on the side. Two guys from out of town figured that what else can they do in a small town like this? They went to a high school football game. And eventually we kept seeing each other long enough that, I know what happened in between. The high holidays came. And Bob felt he really should go to synagogue on high holidays. So he did. And my mother and I were standing on the steps of the synagogue, and he started coming by, and so he stopped to say hello. And I introduced him to my mother. And if you'd known my mother, she was just so friendly and open and gracious hospitality and everything. So being the holidays, the Jewish, I'm sidetracking here a little bit, the Jewish merchants put on, as a fundraiser, a Yom Kippur dance and had tickets. Well, my folks were in the liquor business and they had bought tickets. So after my mom and Bob and I chatted a little bit, she said to Bob, well, if you're not busy tonight, I have tickets to this dance if you'd like to have them. And he said, sure. And of course he knew he had to ask me to the dance because my mother was giving him the tickets. So we went to the dance.
And you were how old?
Oh, I had to be 15.
15, and Dad was 22?
Yeah, he was 6 years older than, no, he's 21. He was
Okay.
21. But the story that really got me was that my mother said, well, I know when you bring Bets home, it'll be a little late, and it's probably too late to go back to the university. We've got an extra bed, you can stay at our house. The thing is, we had a very, very small house, a 2-bedroom house. My folks had 1 bedroom, my brothers had the other bedroom, and I had a bed that was was in the dining room. So I slept in the dining room. And here my mother invited this guy to be in the other bed, in the other bedroom. I was so embarrassed. But it worked out. He kept coming back and kept coming back. And that was what happened as far as our meeting and getting married eventually.
And then he left.
Yeah, he went overseas.
He got shipped out to the war in Europe.
Yeah. He was with the Rainbow Division. He was an ordinary soldier, foot soldier there.
Infantry.
Yeah. And was in quite a few battles. And his unit liberated Dhaka. I think that changed him so much. You could just see some of the liveliness go out of him after seeing what he saw in that camp. It just changed his whole attitude about life a lot. But he came back, and by that time I was going to school in Chicago, and he came to visit me, and then he had to go back home because he started working again.
He went to Chicago to see you?
Yes.
I never knew that.
See, learn something every day.
Where did he stay in Chicago?
With all the relatives in Chicago.
Oh, the Fox relatives.
Yeah,
Okay.
the Foxes that had F&F cough trap lived in Chicago, and the Herzogs. And so he went and he was staying with them, but he came up and he visited me. He went back to Omaha, and at spring break, or summer break, I went back to Fargo. And he came up to Fargo to visit me then, and that's when we decided to get married.
Year?
1945. No, 40,
You got
46. 46, yeah. I graduated in 45.
You got married in?
Yes. We got married in Fargo, and Rabbi Katz, who is now established in Omaha, came up to Fargo to marry us. And what was fun, Bob's dad, Ben Perelman, hired a bus because it was right after the war. Transportation was difficult, and there was a lot of relatives both on the Fox side and on the Perelman side in Omaha. He hired a bus, and everybody piled in there at the end of work Saturday night and drove overnight to Fargo for the wedding. The only ones that didn't were the Morris and Ida Fox flew in, and that was a big deal in that time. It was not a big plane either. I shiver to think of the type of trip they had in a little bitty plane from Chicago to Omaha. Chicago to Fargo. Yeah. It was fun. It was fun.
So you got married in October of 1946.
Yep.
Yep.
27th, October 27th. Yeah.
And you went on your honeymoon, and you came back to Omaha, and you haven't left since.
That's right.
1946.
Yeah.
And you and Dad were married for how long?
Yeah, Dad died at 91 years of age, 4 years ago, almost to the day. He died March 24th. Yeah. And if he had lived till our anniversary in October, we would have been married 67 years. Long, good life. Okay, well, after Bob and I met and we got married, and I came down here and have been there ever since, as I said. We had 3 children. Sarah was born April 3rd, 1948. Steve, go ahead.
August 6, 1950, and then the latecomer, Mike, who was born the day after your birthday, December 10th, 1957.
Yeah. Anyway, it was a big deal for me to come from little old Fargo to big old Omaha. And I really didn't know what was going on, and my sister-in-law, Babe Perelman,
Babe Block.
Babe Block, Ruth Babe Block Perelman, was very good. She had a luncheon, invited all her friends, so I got to meet all of them at one time. It was very nice. And from there on, I started spreading my own wings. But what I learned two things. First of all, if you're going to meet anybody downtown, you meet them under the clock at Brandeis. Okay. I had to go down there to find out where the clock is, because I'd say, "Where's the clock?" "Oh, you'll see it." The other thing I was advised, do not talk about anybody because it's somebody's cousin. Everybody's a cousin.
Except for you. You weren't related to anybody.
Well, not very much. Now, the only bad thing I found out about Omaha at that time, that it was very, very cliquish. Extremely so. If you weren't didn't live in the particular neighborhood, then you weren't in this particular group of girls. And they very much put you in your place. And it took a long time for me to kind of get out of that mood, because I came from a town where you walked around for an evening's walk and you saw, "Oh, there's Gussie's house. Let's stop and say hello," and you stopped and said hello.
And everybody knew everybody.
Yeah. Here, when I tried that once, I was told very nicely, "You're supposed to call before you come in and visit." So Omaha put me in my place, and I learned a lot here.
Where did you live when you came to town?
My father-in-law had a building on North 30th and Stone,
Which is right, just north of Fort Omaha.
and kitty corner from Miller Park. The building contained a store mostly, but on the south side of the building, there were several apartments, 2 upstairs and 2 downstairs, basically. And that's where we lived. We lived in the efficiency apartment in the basement, which was one big room with a bathroom, and that was it. But it was, something, the first room I had to myself after living in the dining room for so long. And
And you didn't mind your roommate either.
no, I loved my roommate, loved him. But my father-in-law and my younger brother-in-law, Mel Perelman, lived in the main apartment upstairs. Eventually, when we were going to have kids, then we got to move in the other main apartment on the first floor. Getting up in society here. And that's when we had Sarah. When we were going to have Steve, we moved over to an apartment on Pratt Street and 24th.
24th and Pratt. And who owned that building?
I don't know who owned it, but
Yes,
I
you
knew, I know who lived next door to me. They did not own it. You see, you
The
didn't?
Blocks?
Yes.
They didn't own that building?
No, Dora and
Joe.
Joe Block lived in the apartment right across the hall from us, because we took the apartment that Babe and Harold had in it. So, we kept it all in the family. And,
You just kept repurposing your home.
yeah, then we went and we moved further and further further west and everything else. The kids all went to Dundee School, and they all went to
Central.
what was
Lewis and Clark.
Lewis and Clark? That was Lewis and Clark, and they all went to Central. So that was and of course Bob and his family were all in the grocery business. You see, when Bob was overseas in the war, his dad quote unquote, bought him a grocery store in South Omaha, which was right by Greenberg's store. Probably thinking that he wasn't capable of making a living, so he was gonna be a good father, provide a place of business for Bob so he could, because he's gonna get married. Of course, he didn't know he was gonna get married. But he didn't stay there too long. No, you know something, I got that wrong.
May I correct that?
Yeah, I'm gonna correct it, because I remember now. He had bought the grocery store in South Omaha. And then he moved, he had already sold the one in North Omaha they had. He had the one in South Omaha, but he bought a store for Bob. It was at 35th and Leavenworth. Am I correct now?
I've never heard of a store in South Omaha
Oh,
that
yeah.
he bought.
Yeah,
Did he work it
Grandpa?
in South Omaha?
Yes, yes.
It's the first I've ever heard
Oh,
of it.
see, it's a good thing. You're learning a lot of
We
things.
gotta talk later.
But the store on 35th and Leavenworth is the one he bought for Bob. Bob didn't really want it. He had plans to go to school and such like that. But he didn't feel that he could tell his dad no. He bought a store for him, for crying out loud. So he stayed in that store for many, many, many years until they finally sold it.
1967.
Yeah. And then he went to his first love, which was stockbroker, stock investments. He was sponsored by Dean Witter and went out to California and San Francisco, and he went through their training school, which was just a tremendous one. Very, very good. So we lived 6 months in San Francisco before we came back home, and he went to work with Dean Witter, and eventually joined with some other fellows and opened a different brokerage house, and that was owned by a firm in Chicago. But eventually he had to have his own business. That's all there was to it. So he got a couple partners, and they bought a brokerage house that was probably going to,
Cliff Rail.
yeah, it was Cliff Rail. He was a playboy in Omaha, but he too had his father buy him a business, which was a stock investment business. But I think Cliff wanted to go out and do other things. So Bob and Joe Ricketts, we loaned money to Joe Ricketts, I want you to know, to be able to go in on this partnership. And they bought Cliff Rail's brokerage house. And we knew that commissions for stock trades were going to be decommissioned. And this is what Bob wanted to do. He was very aggressive in that field. And
Can I jump in for a moment?
go ahead.
They saw the market was changing, and so Dad was able to position himself and his partners so that they were one of, if not the first,
They were the first.
discount stock brokerage firm, not just in Omaha, but in the nation. The name of the firm was First Omaha Securities, and this is the work that Dad and eventually Mom did for the rest of his life. They retired from that eventually.
Yeah.
Okay?
Okay.
So anyway, their office eventually was on the corner of 19th and, what was that?
Douglas.
Yeah, Douglas, that's right.
You were right next to the Fontenelle, just immediately west of the Fontenelle Hotel.
Well, anyway, we went through a lot of phases there. Bob had his first heart problem there. I became a broker there, and
You were, and we have newspaper articles to prove it, she was the first Jewish Omaha stockbroker.
yeah.
You were the first female Jewish stockbroker.
And actually, we were the first husband and wife brokers together in the firm. Yeah. So,
And she was self-taught. She didn't go to school like
No, I
Dad
didn't.
did. She bought a course and she studied it at night with Dad's help.
Yeah.
And she sat and she took the course, the studies, and she passed her test. And so from then on, Dad was here, Mom was here, they worked side by side.
Yeah, all the time until we were retired in, what was it, 2002? 2002. We worked together. Yeah. It was, it was, you'd think that how can you stay together, do everything together, eat together, work together, sleep together, the whole thing. But we made it work, and it was not, I don't think we ever argued one time about it, surprisingly, because our desks they abutted each other right there.
She was a good stockbroker too.
It was an interesting thing. I loved meeting all these people, and I knew them from their phone voices. Many of them I never met. In fact, about 3 years ago, I finally met one of our customers he had been a doctor out like in Philadelphia or something. Retired. He and his wife went to Arizona and retired, and they decided they wanted to come here for one of Berkshire Hathaway meetings. And it's the first time in probably 20 years I'd met them. But I knew all these people.
Knew everybody by name, by voice, but not by face.
Very few, because most of them were out of town.
Yeah, they were licensed in all 50 states, so
Yeah.
we had customers from all over the country. And advertised, we also had offices for a time in Los Angeles and Kansas City?
Oh, no, St. Louis.
St. Louis, okay.
Well,
That
no,
was
things
that.
changed. Things
Yeah.
changed, but it was a good life. It was a very fine life, interesting life. It really, really was. A lot of novels from my kids.
No, thanks. Well, I'm gonna go backwards and start with your grandparents. Like everybody else, I took everybody for granted. I didn't know about my grandparents or my great-grandparents, but I was thinking about this yesterday, and I was a late reader. I was a slow learner in school. But one thing that I always was fascinated with was stories, and so I think I trained myself to listen to my family and my relatives. And I would always just sit there and listen. I just wanted to be around them. So I picked up a lot of stuff. And when the internet became available, I started getting into genealogy. So I've been able to piece together what I consider a love story from my family, because I've gathered as much information as I can. So starting with the Perelmans, their name originally was not Perelman. The name was Perigal. And they came from what's now Ukraine, from a small shtetl called Orozhish, and that's near Lutsk, for anybody who knows their geography. My great-grandmother, Bessie Kamenetsky Perigal, came to this country in 1912 with my grandfather, Ben Perelman, and my aunt, Ruth Perelman Van. Of course, they were kids then. They were just kids. My great-grandfather had passed away in 1907. So there was another brother, Nate, who arrived in 1912, like 3 months later. I don't know why they got separated, but he came later. Left behind in Europe were the two oldest brother and sister of my grandpa Ben, who had already started their married life, had families, so they never came over. They subsequently died in the Shoah. So they came, the Perelmans came to Omaha for some reason I don't know. The first brother that came of my grandfather's was Isidore Perelman. He came in 1909. And then my grandfather and his sister and mother and other brother came in 1912. I've yet to figure out why they came, other than the fact that possibly we are related to the Gus family in Omaha, and there was a Gus here that had been brought to Omaha by the Industrial Removal Organization from New York. And I think people from that time, if they knew of a relative, they went to where that relative was. So anyway, they were in Omaha, and my grandfather was just 16 when he came, and this was in 1912. By 1916, he had met and married my grandmother, who was Sarah Fox Perelman. And they were married until she passed away in 1945 at a very early age. So I never knew her.
Nor I.
No, Mom never met her
Sad to
mother-in-law,
say, too.
which kind of helped change the flavor of your experience, because when you moved to Omaha, you didn't have a mother-in-law, you didn't have any brothers or sisters.
I had nobody on my side.
So you were a fledgling. You kind of learned how to be a wife and a mother all by yourself. You kind of made up the rules as you went, good or bad.
It worked.
It worked. It worked. So that was the Perelman side, or the Paragal side. And the other side is my grandmother, Fox, Sarah Fox Perelman. She came to this country from Kremenets, which is also in Ukraine, but she arrived in about 1903 or 4 with her entire family. And why they came to Omaha, God knows, but they were here. And she had a larger family than my dad's, my grandpa's family, brothers and sisters, aunts and uncles. They settled on Charles, 22nd and Charles Street. And when my grandparents married in 1916, they lived on Charles in this little bitty house, and then eventually the Foxes bought 3 houses in a row on Charles Street, and they repurposed it. One aunt and uncle would live in it and then move out, and another one would move in. So Grandma and Grandpa lived on Charles Street, which is where their first son, my Uncle Harold Perelman, was born. Then they moved out north because my Grandpa Perelman was in business with his brother Nate Perelman, and they had a grocery store on 39th and Charles. So both Nate and Ben's families lived in South Omaha until such time as they split the business off. Nate and family stayed in South Omaha. Grandpa and family moved way across town, North Omaha. I think they needed a lot of space between them. And established himself out in North Omaha as a grocer. They both had their own separate grocery stores, and both did very well and supported a nice family. My grandpa had 3 children. My Uncle Nate had 4 children. The way things should be. But then I had a whole other side of my family, and that's her side of the family. And we would get to go up to Fargo in the summers to visit my grandparents. Mm-hmm. And this was a totally different life, because for one thing, half of her family was Lutheran, who became Jewish. and they lived in this small town, whereas I came from this big city of Omaha. And then when I was born, also my grandpa, her father, Sid Ackerman, had bought land in Detroit Lakes, Minnesota, right on the lake there. He built, with his own hands, he built a home there. Mm-hmm. And which is where it's still there. It's still there, and this was where we would go every summer. Mom would pile us in the car. Dad had to work, of course, so she would get Grandpa's car, a big old Lincoln, pile us in the car, and off we would go. I don't know what you were thinking doing that, but you did it every year.
It seemed very normal to me.
We thought
I
everybody's
still think it's normal.
we thought everybody's mother just got in the car and went cross country, but so we went into this whole new existence up there of being on a lake in the country, carefree. God, it was fun. And I got to have a grandmother because in Omaha I didn't have a grandmother. And golly, that was just heaven on earth to be up there. And my grandpa was so different from my Omaha grandpa because grandpa, he started out as a policeman, and then he went into the barbering business. He was a barbershop owner along with my great-grandfather. So policeman, barbershop owner, then eventually he got
Liquor?
into the liquor store, and I think he owned like 3 or 4 different bars in succession
No,
there.
no.
No,
Oh,
in
in succession,
succession,
yeah.
one after the other, until he retired. So this was a man who was totally different from my typical Omaha Jewish upbringing, a cop. It was excellent. Just to show you how different my Ackerman Euster family were. Her grandma and grandpa Ackerman homesteaded in
Oh, yeah,
Montana.
that's right.
They left Fargo in the first decade of the 20th century, and with her brothers, my great-grandmother's brothers, moved to Montana, homesteaded claims there, lived there for however long it took to prove their claim, and might have stayed there forever except for the fact that they thought that their kids needed a Jewish upbringing and needed to marry Jewish people. So they sold the claim, moved back to Fargo, and life went on from there. But that's the kind of other side that I came from too. So I got the best of both worlds, and I loved it. And I got to hear stories. My grandmother had 7 sisters. Each one was different and weird.
Riot.
Yeah, and they would have reunions every other couple of years or so. By the time I came along, one sister lived in Los Angeles, one sister lived in Chicago, my grandmother and an aunt lived in Fargo, and the other 3 lived in Washington, D.C.
In Florida.
Well, that was much later. So they would get together. They were very close sisters, and I would get, when I was lucky enough to be in their presence during any of these reunions, all of the stories I heard. And I just sat there and drank it in. I loved it all.
I gotta tell one story about when they came for the reunion. I think it was Steve's bar mitzvah.
Sarah's.
Was it Sarah's? Okay. I thought, by that time I knew how to make chicken soup and canela and things like that. And I thought, well, I'm really gonna show them. I'm gonna be like Grandma. So one of the evenings we had to ourselves, my aunt sat down to dinner, and I proudly served them a bowl of chicken soup with canela in it, and they had it and everything, and they said, Bets, this is good, but it's not like Grandma's. Her canela were so hard, they hit bottom. Yours aren't quite that hard. So, and then, what they do after that is they would play poker, penny ante poker. And my father-in-law found out about it, so he came over to play poker with them. So it was a family that really enjoyed each other. That was mainly it. There was a book, in fact, Sarah has a copy of it, our Sarah. It was written by this lady. It wasn't really written. She dictated it to somebody. And the way they wrote at that time, they just kept writing. There wasn't punctuation marks like a period or comma or anything else like that. But she had been, the person that had dictated this story, had been a Jewish gal from Russia or one of the other countries there. and was brought over to North Dakota as wives for the ranchers, the other whatever else.
Whatever Jew out there needed a Jewish woman,
Yeah,
she came over, she signed up.
yeah, and it is such an interesting
I think
story.
the title of the book is Prairie Dogs Are Kosher,
Could be something like that.
something like that.
But it talked about, she talked about the life on the prairie and through all the seasons, and how they got their food, and how they kept up a Jewish home.
And even kept kosher.
I don't remember that part, but I'm trying to figure out how it could be kosher with all the squirrels
Well,
and everything
there-
out there.
Rabbi Katz, in fact, when he was rabbi up in Fargo, he wasn't just the rabbi in Fargo. He had a circuit that he traveled in North Dakota and Minnesota, where he'd go from each community wherever there was a Jew. He'd do the brisses, he'd do the burying, and he was also the slaughter.
Yeah, the shepherd. He used to
So-
come to my grandmother's house and do that. I was scared to death because down in the basement were all these chickens running around.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, they kept kosher out on the plains if they could. I'm sure it wasn't as like in the city, but yeah, they do.
You know, she told about the snows and how it came and actually covered their small homes on the prairie there and everything. It was a tough life.
But something we forgot to mention earlier, you know, my grandpa Sid Ackerman and his father Jake Ackerman, they at one time they were barbers, and in the early days in Fargo, in the basement of where they had their barber shop, they also had the mikveh. So Fargo did have a mikveh, and it was in my grandfather and great grandfather's basement of their barber shop.
Oh yeah, that's right. They did have a mikvah.
Yeah, yeah. Not that my grandparents, I never remember my Ackerman grandparents being that frum. In fact, the Jewish religion was really on the periphery for them. They were Jewish, their kids married Jewish and all, but somehow though, they grew the straw. They had the mikveh.
You know, I sometimes think it's because Grandma converted. And when you convert, you really learn the religion. It isn't like we who were born to it. We hear about things, we observe it, we don't observe it, whatever it is. But she knew it all, and she was a stickler for details.
Remember when you were dating a non-Jewish boy? Go ahead.
My grandmother, not being Jewish originally, I'm sure that there was probably controversy between my grandparents at times. But eventually they ended up, after they sold all their homes, they moved in with us in my dad's house. My older brother was gone, so there was an extra bedroom.
He was in the Air Force.
Yeah. So I was dating, and I was dating this non-Jewish boy, nice guy. And first they objected because he was Jewish, and
Non-Jewish.
he was non-Jewish. That's when I found out that at one time they almost separated because they were one Jewish one. But she had converted. That was a kind of an offshoot of the story. But this fellow I was dating, he brought me home, sat in the car. Street light is right over the car, just as bright as during daylight. And evidently my grandmother and grandfather, both or one or the other, watched us and watched us and watched us. And when we came in, the next day, they drilled my dad. Why are you letting her go out? He keeps you out, and he's sitting in the car. They're in the car all this time by themselves. One of the very few times I ever spoke back to my grandparents, I said, look, if we wanted to do something, we were under the street light, and you could have come out and broken it up. I said, we didn't do anything except talk.
So what I took away from that story of you dating a non-Jewish guy and grandma and grandpa sitting in the living room watching you was that my great-grandmother, who was a converted Lutheran, now Jew, was more upset about you dating a non-Jewish boy than your own parents.
Right, right. Yeah, she was upset about it. Not my grandfather as much as my grandmother.
Oh,
I think she realized that, there's always something will come up in a marriage, and when you get hot-headed sometimes, angry, you'll say things that you shouldn't say.
she lived it.
That's right, and so she didn't want me to have to go through that. That's something.
All of her family is buried up in Fargo in the Jewish cemetery. And Mom and I go up to Fargo every summer, and we check in at the cemetery, make sure everybody's right where we left them. Put some stones on the graves, coins, they're all, it's weird, we put coins on the stones up there when we forget to bring stones. The coins are still there after a year.
Yeah,
Just kind of tells you about Fargo. Everybody is very clean and neat and courteous. And I've been going up there so long, ever since I was a kid. I feel like I know the people in the cemetery. Their names are second nature to me now. And it's Fargo family. It's family to me. Not as much as for you, but I love going up there. In fact, one year we photographed every tombstone in the cemetery and submitted the photos to jewishgen.org so that they could post that on information on their site for genealogists. I also did this for all of the Jewish cemeteries in Omaha, Council Bluffs,
in Lincoln.
Lincoln, and Nebraska City. There's a lot of dead people in all these places. So if you ever get onto Jewish Gen and look up a relative's name from Omaha or Fargo, I did it. What was I going to say?
I don't know, I'm trying to think what other things would be
I should tell you about myself and my brother and my sister. Well, I have a younger sister. She's
No, you don't. You have
an
an
older
older-
sister. She's 2 years older. Her name is Sarah Perelman. She was the first of the kids, so they didn't know any better and didn't give her a middle name.
No, that's not the reason.
I'm making the story up.
Good, because I'll tell the real story.
Okay.
She was named after her grandmother,
Sarah Perelman.
whose name, Jewish name was, or Yiddish name I would say, is Sprinza. And as I understand, when she went to Hebrew school, they would not call her Sprinza because that was a slang name more or less. So she was called Sarah.
Well, it's a Yiddish name,
Yeah.
not a Hebrew name, and they wanted Hebrew names.
Yes.
Well, she didn't have one. It was Sprinza.
Yeah, so she was Sprinza, but, so she's named after her grandmother, and the reason she does not have a middle name is because her grandmother did not have one, and your dad wanted her to have exactly her grandmother's name.
Yeah.
That's the reason.
And I never knew my grandma Perelman, only by what my father would tell me. Grandpa would always cry, and I understand why. But my father, whenever he talked about his mother, she was an angel. She could do no wrong. She was the greatest cook in the world.
She was
typical.
from other people that told me that too.
So that's why I guess Dad wanted his firstborn, his daughter, to be exactly like his mother.
Yeah,
So that's Sarah Perelman. Sarah.
that's it.
I came along 2 years later in 1950. I am named for her her grandparents, the Eusters, Yisroel Chaya, and I'm Yisroel Chaim. Then my brother Mike came in 1957. The story that's always told about Mike is, on Sunday morning it was our habit to pile in bed with Mom and Dad and read the paper, do whatever. And one Sunday we were there and they said, "Would you like a dog?" would you like a puppy dog or would you like a baby brother or sister? We all voted for the dog. We got Mike instead. There, it was a fake
Literally,
question.
that's what happened.
It was a fake question. So Mike came in 1957. Most of our youth was spent in the house that Mom and Dad bought in 1955 at 5604 Farnham Street. We lived there until both Sarah and I were married before you sold that house and moved out.
Yeah, we moved out of there right before the tornado and right after the big snowstorm that covered all of Omaha.
So we grew up in the Dundee area. And oh my gosh, when I was a little kid there, our next door neighbors were the Dr. Robert Engel, and next to them was Rabbi Brooks. Across the street was the Bleicher family. Next block over, Julie Simon lived. The block after that, the
Was the
Rothmans,
Roth-
the Kymans, the Reutsteins, the Noggs. The neighborhood was chock full of Jewish people.
And Catholics from St.
And
Margaret
Catholics,
Mary's.
yeah. But, you know, we were within walking distance to Bethel Synagogue, and so a lot of people lived in the Dundee area there. And so, golly, I remember you would send me on my bike from 56th and Farnham to Forbes Bakery, which was at
Underwood,
50th and Underwood. And
think nothing of it.
think nothing, yeah, that was one of my chores, to go up to Forbes Bakery for that wonderful Jewish dark rye or bagels. And then eventually, when they closed, Sherman's Bakery moved in about a half block to the west. And so I was still riding up there to get the
And
Shabbos.
pretty soon you were driving up there instead of riding up
Yeah,
there.
yeah, that's right. But it was a great neighborhood to grow up in because we walked to Dundee, and we walked with the Brookses and the Ingalls and the Bleichers, and it was just the whole herd of us going there. And
It was a good childhood for you guys.
yeah, we had Memorial Park at the bottom of the hill in Elmwood Park, and we just went and did almost anything we wanted up until 1959. In 1959, my grandpa Ben's sister, Ruth Perelman Van, and her husband, Rube Van, were crossing the street to their home on the north side of Dodge Street. They were struck and killed by a car
Speeding on Dodge.
and died together in 1959. After that, which was indeed a tragedy in so many ways, in the way it affected our family. But Mom became pretty protective. We weren't allowed to cross Dodge Street. If we went to cross Dodge Street, we had to walk all the way over to the underpass at 49th
Yeah.
to get under.
Of course, they didn't. I found out later, they
Well,
didn't always do it.
Eventually, we rebelled. But, yeah, things changed after that a little bit for us. That I think was my first experience with death. I was 9 years old. I remember sitting at my grandfather's house during Shiva, not understanding, but knowing that it was somebody important. And that death created a rift in the family between the Vans and the Perelmans. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's just our family, maybe it's other Jewish families, but hard feelings seem to last for a long time. And there was no communication after that.
Which is
And-
sad. But it happens, it seems like in every family, for some reason or another. I don't know, money, health, whatever it is.
It seemed to be there was a lot of tragedy that hit our family. I mean, there was, yeah, just put that up here. This was my grandfather's sister who died. Prior to that, in 1934, the original Perelman to come to Omaha, my uncle Isidore, was shot and murdered at his store.
It's Uncle Mall.
Yeah, and then my grandfather's remaining, other two, a brother and a sister, of course, died in the Holocaust in Europe. That left my grandfather and his brother Nate. And our family shrunk, not from natural causes, all from tragedy. And for the longest time I thought, my God, the Perelmans are this small, insular little family. There are no other Perelmans in the world. Well, I found out that's not true, but we lived in a little cocoon, and really, when there was a tragedy like that, it was so acutely felt. My grandfather never got over that.
Yeah. So,
But anyway, I led a pretty typical life growing up. I was in AZA 100. My sister was in Kevra, BBG. I don't know what Mike was in. There's 7 years between my brother Mike and myself. I was off to college while he was doing all the things that I can remember me doing. So who knows what he did.
I don't know.
You
He
don't
didn't
know.
come home and tell.
Yeah, he grew up with a different set of parents than I did. They were a little bit strict with us. By the time Mike came along, anything went.
Well, you learn to relax with
Yeah,
kids
you
eventually.
learn to
that's
relax.
all.
I graduated from high school in 1968, and from there I went to college at Bradley University in Peoria, Illinois. Stayed there for a year and a half, transferred to University of Iowa, where I graduated. My sister Sarah graduated from Washington University in St. Louis.
That's
My-
where she met her husband.
Yep, yep. And my brother Mike went to Stanford in California, graduated from there, went to,
Medical school.
Einstein
Yeah,
School of
Albert
Medicine
Einstein.
in New York, and then he did his residency at the Mayo Clinic, and eventually became a thoracic surgeon. My sister married Aaron Hoffman, a native of St. Louis. He's an attorney, and they moved to Chicago and still live there, and now split their time between Chicago and Israel. They bought their second home, and they have 2 daughters. And I married Betty Rosenthal from Dallas, Texas, where I lived with her until we divorced. And now I've, after moving around, lived in Omaha since, golly, I can't even remember when I moved back, but I'm married. I'm married to Ralph Kellogg. We have been married for 3 years legally, but been together, it'll be 25 years in Thanksgiving Day. My brother Mike is married to a lady from Chicago. She originally was a nurse. That's how they met. He was in training, and she was a nurse at the hospital there. She has become a dentist. Very accomplished family, and they have 2 daughters as well.
But she's no longer a dentist. She is a director of some kind of dental information with their computer programming. She but manages it and implements it for New York University.
Yeah, so they split their time between their home in New York and Carlsbad, California.
Yeah, where the kids all grew up.
So we got family flung far and wide. My father's remaining brother, living brother, is Melvin Perelman. He had a very interesting life. He was a president eventually of Eli Lilly.
Vice president.
I think he made it to president of some division.
He was vice president of the company and president of the European division for quite a while. Yeah. For
They-
Eli Lilly.
So they lived in Indianapolis, so I didn't know those cousins because they were far away. But the cousins I do have in town, or did have, were the kids of my Uncle Harold and Aunt Babe. Babe Block. Shelley, Pam, and Dell Perelman. And they grew up on North 57th Avenue, just to the north of Memorial Park. And we would always be together for all of the Jewish holidays. Grandpa at the head of the table, and it was, whether it was Pesach or Yom Kippur, Thanksgiving, whatever, we were always together. And I just remember one year it would be at our house, the next year it would be at Babe and Harold's house. And because we had the grocery store, and that grocery store didn't close until what, 8 o'clock at night?
Try 8:30.
8:30 at night. Whenever Passover was, no matter whose house, Seder started after the Grandpa and Harold and Grandpa and
kids-
Dad got home.
So the kids are sitting there sleeping while we're davening.
Seder wasn't over until midnight, and but believe me, you never heard anything until you heard Had Gadya at midnight. But the food was always so good. I love Passover food. Now, my mother is not a good cook. She's self-taught. And so, I learned that whatever Mom cooked was great. I've learned other
Different since then.
not so good. But you learn how to cook some really good food for the holidays. I still hunger for that, and nobody makes it as good as Mom does. But of course, that's everybody's story with their mother.
Of course. Otherwise, mothers would go out of business.
That's right. That's right.
Yes. So that's,
All right. Yeah. Going back to when you came to Omaha as a bride, and you didn't know anybody, and Aunt Babe kind of broke you into the social circle.
yeah,
It was her social circle and all the girls that she had grown up with, because Babe
Yes.
Block grew up in Omaha and married an Omaha boy and everything. So her friends became your friends.
yes.
And
Always has been that way.
yeah, except you outlived them all.
Yes, I did.
She's on her second set of friends now. All the original ones are
And
gone.
even those are going, unfortunately, quite,
But,
even the ones that are younger than I.
But I remember always coming. I don't know what day you played during the week. Played mahjong.
Oh, Thursday, it used
Thursdays.
to be Thursday.
I'd come home from school, and if it was Mom's day to have the game, there were 2 card tables in the living room with all the ladies there, drinking tea or coffee out of their painted cups, smoking their cigarettes. Mom never smoked. And who was there? There was Lois Endelman, Aunt Babe,
Mildred Trudikov,
yeah,
Zelda Stallmaster,
yeah,
trying to think of some of the others.
Cooper, Celia Cooper,
Yeah. Oh, Charlotte
Sure,
Slutsky,
yeah,
Shirley Berman,
Schwartz.
yeah, and Sylvia Schwartz. Oh, yeah. All the names you guys know and remember.
And it was a traveling game, so it would be at our house, and then
It'd be the next one in the alphabet, it was then theirs. You went the alphabet, it was the easiest way to remember.
and was it a game a week? Was it one?
You know, I'm trying to remember, I think it was more like every other week. And, and we used to not just put out little sweets and a cup of coffee. We had a whole lunch, a full lunch. And the women and the hostess provided the cigarettes too.
Yes.
Yes. If there were any left over, I had to give them to Babe or somebody because neither Bob or I smoked. But no, the hostess, it was expected the hostess had to provide the cigarettes. But a full lunch with dessert. Ah, yes.
So, and that was what I thought social life was.
Oh, well, you're too young and had to go to sleep too early when we had our parties.
But then I found out then they had a cousins club as well
Yes.
for a while, and these were all the Foxes. That was Harold and Ruth Fox,
Jack and Francis.
Jack and Francis Fox, Al and Esther Fox.
all right.
Then who else was there?
Oh,
Babe and Harold Perelman, Bob and Betty Perelman,
but I'm trying, I know that there was a couple more and I can't even think of them now.
and so again, that was their social. But we didn't belong to the Highland Country Club, so Dad worked 24/7 practically. So it's not like they were going out on weekends and partying and dancing like they
But-
did on television.
But the thing is, our group, our generation would have parties, whether it was an anniversary, something big, or maybe they decided it was time to repay all the other people that they'd gone to their parties, so they'd have it at, say, New Year's or something, whatever it was. And that's when we had cocktail dresses. The whole really all got dressed up, and we served drinks and a full meal. They were really great parties, yeah. I mean, in my group, everybody had at least two cocktail cocktail dresses. Oh yeah, you had to have those. It was a different life. It was an
time.
easier life, and it was a very gentle,
And
nice life.
you and Dad had the right kind of house for it too. It was a big house, it flowed, no place to park. We were right there on Farnham Street, but somehow everybody managed to get over there. And, yeah, so that was my parents' social life, because most of the time they were working.
Yeah. Well, most of the other couples had the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it wasn't so much that it was just the people that you knew from synagogue, but I think everybody in the group kind of
Well, I think it was these.
were all around.
This was a generation where most of the
Strictly
men,
Jewish.
where most of the men had served in the war during World War II. So they all had something in common that they talk about at these parties, besides the other things. But that's what kind of drew all of this group together, is that they all shared an experience, and that was something.
So now she's on to her second group of friends, and she's looking for thirds.
Actually, I do have a few of the generation below me because of that, yes.
Yeah, but she did the same thing that her mother did, my grandmother. Grandma lived in Fargo. My grandmother also did not drive. So she lived to be 80. And when my grandparents eventually moved out to Detroit Lakes, which was a rural community, and their home was on the lake, and it was really outside of town, and Grandma didn't drive, but she left Fargo with all of her Jewish friends. She had to create a whole new social group out in Detroit Lakes. And so she put away her mahjong set, or taught the ladies out there how to play mahjong, and learned how to play card games, and they all came and picked Grandma up. And this one learned to do just like her mother.
You always, and now I see my daughter over in Israel. In fact, I just read a letter from her that they had to wrap everything up because they're coming back for Passover. And she said, I have to clear the food out of the house now because we have so many friends that want us to come for dinner before we leave to go back to the United States. And I'm thinking, that's really nice. All these people over in Israel that are friends of theirs. And they come from England, South Africa, all over. So, what a different life.
Very
It's different, and yet basically it's the same, but it's still different.
You raised very friendly people as kids.
Came from their grandmother.
Yeah, yeah. I didn't learn from my grandma Perelman, of course, because I didn't know her. I had my grandma Ackerman, and she was the bubbliest, warmest,
Yeah.
most loving woman, and hopefully I picked up some of her traits.